Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you, Tom. Can I possibly have this up? This thing, of course you can.
Thank you very much.
Put the mic quite close to you. So.
Well, good morning, everyone, and again, thank you to Tom and Sam. And I'd also like to perhaps pass some thanks on to several members of this audience, at least, who over the past 2 years or so have given an awful lot of their time and effort in getting the UK to the position we are at the moment as we go forward to 2015. And although Sam has very kindly promoted me to the lead on this, I would just say that I am simply the HFA focal point in the UK, and that we run the UK national platform, but actually an awful lot of hard work has been done by DFID, and I would particularly pick out Ursula, who's worked very hard and here with us today. So you've got a lot of government knowledge out there. I'd also like to just carry on from a couple of things which have come up so far, and they are the politics, the leadership, and the political goodwill, which I think are very, very important for this. And some of you may be unsurprised to learn that for about 8 years, DRR has not been very high on the UK government agenda. So 2013 was a little bit of a watershed for the UK, because two things happened. One I think I'd describe as a good thing, and one I would describe, certainly in the UK, as a disaster, but some of you who work further afield would probably laugh at our idea of a disaster, but I'll explain that in 2 seconds. The first thing that happened in 2013 was the UK undertook a peer review. And that peer review was based on the monitor which UNISDR ask us to fill in every 2 years, to say how we're getting on against a series of standards put out in their monitoring form. And it's self-assessment, and it won't surprise you to learn that by and large we get 4s and 5s in that, and nobody ever questions whether we are at those levels. So we went back to UNISDR and said, look, we think this is a little bit silly, because I'm putting down 4 and 5s, and I know that not a single person in the UK knows how much we spend on DRR in the UK. And so we offered ourselves for this peer review, in which 3 countries from the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, which is the regional body that Tom was talking about in Europe, came to the UK, along with OECD and the European Union, who very kindly funded all this, and looked at how we were getting on against the UN monitor. And you can find the results of that online. But the important thing for me were not the results of that, but the fact that this took this up the political agenda, and our Minister Chloe Smith, who you see there, received this. She was fully briefed on it. It became a very, very important thing in the UK DRR agenda. It was also, in a sense, the kiss of death for her, because I think 2 weeks after this, she resigned as a minister. And you see the difficulty that we then start again with, she was never replaced, so now we start again. But then a disaster happened. And I'd just like to show you about the one set of statistics which we keep as a database in the UK. Because one of the major risks in the UK is East Coast flooding. And East Coast flooding, as I doubt anybody in this room remembers, happened in 1953, and a major flooding event took place on the East Coast and cost, at that time, £50 million, but in today's money that's about 1.2 million. And 60 years on, virtually to the day, exactly the same weather system came down the North Sea, exactly the same conditions, exactly the same type of flooding that occurred 60 years previously. And you can see that the difference between the two is quite fairly startling. There were 307 deaths in 1953 and there were 2 this year, and even those, I think there's some doubt that those could actually be related to flooding. 65 hectares of land lost, 2,700 this time. Quarter of the evacuations, critical national infrastructure protected, and in 1953 we had no flood warnings, but 2013 we have a flood warning system in place. So what that told a minister was that if you spend money before a disaster happens, you not only save lives, but you save an awful lot of money. And Tom is absolutely right. The 200 billion which is quoted is for Western well-off countries. But if you can show ministers that spending something now will save them an awful lot of money down the road, then that is an important lesson for us to be putting in front of ministers, as you can see we did. And as a result of this, in the UK at least, there will be an awful lot of spending of money to protect infrastructure round the coasts and against flooding. So £1 spent now saves the Environment Agency £8 during a response. So those 2 events have moved prevention right up the agenda in the UK. So the timing was good. And then the UNISDR asked us to do, as the national platform, to begin the preparation for the future priorities for HFA2. And DFID and the Cabinet Office worked together on this very closely to put in place what we called an advisory group. And that advisory group, there are at least 3 members of it in here, included, Tom was one of the members, science, academia, NGOs, government departments, as many people as we could across that line to get some expert input as to what we would go to the 4th global platform for DRR with. What kind of issues did the UK want to take to that meeting? And we came up, I think, with 5. And those 5, and it's quite interesting as we go through this just to read those against the kind of work that's come out in the framework and to see where we're missing in terms of that framework. But there were 5. So we went to that conference and the UK position was we wanted to improve accountability. That was seen as a very big issue. To ensure that disaster risk reduction is a humanitarian and development priority, and to align all of the agendas as we've spoken about before. To tackle the root cause of vulnerability, to focus on the most vulnerable, as Tom said, I think we've got those 4 in there, and moving the focus from national to the local and community level to encourage a more inclusive approach. In the UK, all resilience is built on a bottom-up approach, from the local to the national. And that's one of the things we wanted to encourage. And then following that, and you can see again we've got some political input into this. Alan Duncan, DFID Minister, came along and he was involved in the London event. We had those 2 events, one in London, one in Manchester, and out of that came not 5 but 9 priority areas which we wanted to take forward to present to ministers. Now I just caution you that these have not been presented to ministers yet. They will be in 2 weeks' time, but they have not been presented to ministers yet, and we wait and see what their views are on that. But just to go through them again, we retain this alignment. It's important to keep the post-2015 development agenda together. Improve the interlinkages between different sectors, as has already been said. Improve the accountability within the new framework. We are really pushing this one quite hard. Ensuring HFA2 had a credible evidence base, and I've perhaps alluded a little bit to that, why we want that in the UK, including the generation of a baseline, regular risk assessment, scorecards, promoting greater transparency. Tackling the cause of vulnerability hasn't moved, encouraging the use of multidisciplinary scientific and technical advice. And I just emphasise that one as one of the ones we are again really pushing. And there are people in this room who've done a huge amount of work on this, and Tom again and UK CDS in the UK are really pushing on this one, and so are we to support them of actually moving this forward in this second HFA. The greater use of local government and community level engagement, we really want to push this as well. Clearly we do, because that's how we do it in the UK, and we think it's very useful. Improving communication. How well do we do? I think Tom sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier on, that actually, well, I mean, one of the things which actually came up in the discussions which we had was that HFA doesn't actually tell you what's in the tin. And an awful lot of people in the UK don't actually know what HFA means or stands for. It needs, a little bit more perhaps, even at that simplistic level, but clearly that's a slightly big one. And the final thing which we're really pushing on, and that I suspect that won't surprise you given the current coalition government, is strengthening the private sector's role in improving resilience. And we're very pleased to have PwC leading one of the groups in our discussions, and they are doing an awful lot of work both nationally, internationally, in disaster risk reduction, and getting business much more involved in it. So that's where we are nationally. As I say, in the next 2 weeks we hope to put these in front of ministers, to find out their red lines, to find out their position, and watch this space. Thank you very much.